The wind whipped across the dry prairie, carrying the scent of sagebrush and distant campfires. In the fading light of dusk, a lone figure huddled under a tattered blanket near the banks of a shallow creek. Her hair, tangled and dark as raven feathers, clung to her dirt-streaked face, and her eyes, sharp and restless, darted toward the horizon. She was small, fragile in appearance, but something in her gaze suggested a depth no hardship could erase. She had a secret, one that would change everything. "Your twins aren't dead," she whispered into the cold evening air, her voice trembling yet determined. The man who heard her was not just any man. He was a warrior of the old ways, an apache whose presence commanded respect even among the most hardened settlers. His frame was broad, muscles carved from years of survival and battle, yet there was a quiet gentleness in the way he moved, as if every step was measured to protect life rather than take it. His eyes, dark and unwavering, held both sorrow and a burning resolve. When he knelt beside her, the wind seemed to pause, as though the world itself waited for what would come next. He had been chasing rumors for weeks, whispers of a child stolen, a family torn apart by greed and blood. Every lead had dissolved into dust, leaving nothing but heartache and frustration. Yet here in the shadow of the dying sun, the ants, was alive and trembling before him. The girl's small hand reached for his, tentative yet desperate, and in that touch, the warrior felt a thread of hope stitch itself into his weary soul. I thought they were gone forever," he said, his voice low and steady, but it carried the weight of every sleepless night he had endured. His fingers brushed against hers, strong but careful, grounding her in a world that had been cruel for far too long. She shivered not from cold, but from the weight of her own secret. She had wandered from town to town, hiding from those who would see her silenced, until fate had guided her here. The Apache's name was Tayan, a name that echoed like a drumbeat in the hearts of those who knew his story. He had loved once, long ago, in a world before grief had hardened him. His heart had been claimed by a woman as fearless as the land they walked, and together they had dreamed of a life filled with laughter and firelight. But tragedy had torn that dream apart, leaving him wandering between shadows and memories, carrying a pain only the wind could witness. Yet now, facing this small, defiant girl, he felt the stirrings of something he had thought lost forever, the possibility of redemption, and perhaps of love reborn. The girl, whose name was Ayana, spoke of a night so dark it had nearly swallowed her hope. Her parents, taken by a ruthless gang of settlers seeking land and vengeance, had left her with nothing but whispers of safety. She had survived by wits and courage, moving silently through towns, offering her labor for scraps, her eyes always watching, always learning. And now, in a moment that seemed carved by destiny itself, she revealed the truth that would ignite Tayan's world. "They took the children, but they didn't survive the fire they claimed," Ayana said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I saw them. They are alive, hidden, but in danger." Her words struck Tayan with the force of an arrow. Alive. His twins' children, he had mourned. Imagine buried under the ashes of betrayal were out there, breathing, waiting. His mind raced with questions, with fear and a desperate hope that refused to be tamed. Around them the prairie stretched in endless waves, golden and harsh, the sun dipping behind distant hills, casting long shadows that seemed to creep toward them. There was no time for hesitation. Danger was never far in these lands, and Tayan knew the kind of men who would kill without conscience to claim what was not theirs. He felt the pulse of the earth beneath his boots, the rhythm of the wind through the tall grass, and with it came the clarity that his next move could not fail. Yet even in this moment of imminent peril, there was something unspoken between them, a spark of connection that neither dared name. Ayana's small hand had lingered in his for just a moment longer than necessary, and Tayan felt it deep in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with fire. Perhaps it was the remnants of a love he had thought lost. Perhaps it was something new, fragile yet fierce, planted in the soil of shared purpose and trust. "I will find them," he said finally, voice steady but edged with steel. "No one will harm them if I can prevent it." Ayana nodded, relief flickering in her eyes, but also fear. They both knew the road ahead would not be gentle, The gang that had torn her family apart would not forgive an intrusion. Their enemies were ruthless, armed with guns and malice, and the landscape offered little shelter. But Taeon was a man of the land, of the traditions of his people, and he knew how to move like shadow and wind, unseen and unstoppable. As night fell, stars scattered across the black canvas of the sky. Taeon prepared. He checked the bow at his side, the quiver heavy with arrows sharpened to a deadly point. Ayana gathered what little she had, her small pack containing maps, notes, and tokens of the children she had secretly protected from afar. The two of them stood together on the edge of the creek, silhouettes etched against the silver glow of moonlight, and the prairie seemed to hold its breath. Then, just as the first owl cried in the distance, a sound reached them, a soft, almost imperceptible shuffle from the trees beyond. Taeon stiffened, eyes narrowing, instinct screaming. It could be nothing, or it could be the first move of an enemy long thought vanquished. Ayana clutched his arm, and for a heartbeat the vast empty world seemed smaller, focused on this one moment of impending danger and urgent promise. "Whatever comes," Taeon said, a low growl of certainty in his voice. "We face it together," Ayana swallowed, nodding, her resolve hardening like the stones beneath their feet. She had trusted few in her life, but she knew somehow that this warrior would not fail her. And as the shadows deepened, as the wind whispered through the sagebrush, the world held its breath. The twins were out there, waiting, and the next step Taeon would take could either save them or destroy everything. But even as his heart beat in anticipation, neither he nor Ayana could know the truth of what lay ahead. The prairie had a way of testing even the strongest souls, and nightfall promised more than darkness. It promised secrets, confrontations, and revelations that would shake them to their core. In that frozen moment, with the cold creek at their feet and the vast unknown stretching before them, the story began not with certainty, but with a whisper of hope, a promise of danger, and a connection that neither of them could yet name. And somewhere, beyond the trees and hills, unseen eyes watched, waiting for the first move. The fate of the twins, the heart of a warrior, and the courage of a homeless girl teetered on the edge of what was about to unfold. The night deepened over the prairie, a velvet blanket punctuated by the faint shimmer of distant stars. Taeon crouched beside the creek, his sharp eyes scanning the shadows that twisted and shifted with every gust of wind. Beside him, Ayana remained still, her fingers lightly brushing against the smooth surface of a small wooden charm she carried, a gift from her mother, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope could be held. She had learned early that survival demanded both courage and secrecy, and yet, standing next to Taeon, she felt a strange sense of safety she had never known before. As they moved silently through the tall grass, Taeon's mind drifted back to the past, to memories that haunted him and fueled his relentless pursuit of justice. He remembered the night his own family had been scattered, their lives stolen by men who sought land, power, and fear. He had fought and failed, leaving only fragments of his old life behind. Those losses had shaped him, hardening his body and sharpening his instincts, but they had not dulled the capacity for love or tenderness. Meeting Ayana had awakened something buried, a flicker of warmth that stirred a long-forgotten yearning for connection. Ayana, for her part, had always been a wanderer in a world that refused to nurture her. She had grown up knowing hunger, cold, and the constant threat of violence. Her parents had been gentle souls caught in a storm of greed, and their absence had left her with a fierce determination to survive and protect what little remained of her family. Her heart had hardened, but not entirely. She still believed in the possibility of good, in the chance that someone could care enough to fight for those who could not fight for themselves. The moment she had met Taeon, a warrior marked by loss and resolve, something inside her had shifted. His presence was commanding yet kind, a paradox she could not ignore. As they approached the first ridge, Taeon paused, crouched low, and signaled for silence. In the dim moonlight, shadows danced across the landscape, and the rustle of leaves hinted at movement. The prairie, beautiful yet unforgiving, held secrets in every fold of its land. And tonight, it whispered warnings to those who dared listen. Taeon's instincts flared. There was more at play here than a simple reunion with lost children. The gang that had taken Ayana's family was clever, ruthless, and deeply entrenched in the surrounding settlements. They would not let go without a fight, and they had eyes everywhere. Ayana followed Taeyeon's gaze, her pulse quickening. She had trusted few in her life, yet with every step he led, she felt a strange but undeniable bond forming. There was something in the way Taeyeon moved, alert, precise, protective, that made her feel seen and shielded. Even in a world that had taught her to expect betrayal at every turn. She glanced at him, the moonlight catching the contours of his strong jaw and the intensity of his dark eyes. There was a story there, one of pain, loss, and resilience, and she sensed that their paths had crossed not by chance, but by the weaving of fate itself. "Do you know where they are?" Taeyeon asked quietly, his voice low enough that only Ayana could hear. "I have an idea," she whispered. "A place hidden deep in the hills where no one goes, except for those who are desperate enough to find what's lost." She hesitated, her eyes searching his. "But we're not the only ones looking." The words struck him like a stone thrown into still water. The twins were alive, yes, but the danger surrounding them was far from over. Whoever held them more, whoever knew of their existence, would not hesitate to use them as leverage, or worse. Taeyeon's mind raced with possibilities, strategies, and contingencies. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, heavier than the pack he carried or the quiver on his back. The stakes had never been higher, and failure was not an option. As they descended into a narrow valley, the air grew colder, carrying the faint scent of smoke from distant fires. The land shifted from open prairie to rugged hills, dotted with scrub trees and jagged rocks. Every step was deliberate, every sound measured. Ayana moved close, letting Taeyeon's steady presence guide her, trusting instincts she had learned over years of survival. Despite the tension, there was a quiet intimacy in their silence, a connection forged through shared purpose and the unspoken acknowledgement of mutual need. Memories surfaced unbidden. Taeyeon remembered the lullabies his mother had sung when he was small, songs of courage and home. He remembered the warmth of his lost love's touch, the softness that had made his heart ache even now. Ayana remembered the nights she had cried herself to sleep, imagining the embrace of her parents and the laughter of her lost siblings. In that shared silence, between the crunch of dry grass and the whisper of the wind, their separate histories converged, creating a fragile tapestry of hope and longing. Suddenly, a distant shout echoed through the valley, sharp and urgent. Taeyeon froze, every muscle coiled, listening. Ayana's hand found his arm, gripping it tightly. The sound repeated, closer this time, mingled with the creak of horse hooves and the unmistakable clatter of weapons. Taeyeon's heart hardened. The gang had found them sooner than he expected. He crouched low, pulling Ayana behind a boulder. Shadows shifted in the dim light, revealing movement among the trees. Figures emerged, rough men with hardened faces, rifles slung across their shoulders, eyes scanning the valley with predatory focus. "They know we're here," Taeyeon murmured, his jaw tight. He studied the men, memorizing their patterns, their spacing, and the rhythm of their patrol. There was no room for error. The twins' lives depended on his precision, and failure would mean more than just personal loss. It would mean the extinguishing of hope itself. Ayana's fingers brushed against his, a silent plea, and he squeezed back in reassurance. Their bond, tenuous yet strong, became a lifeline in the looming storm. "Stay close," he whispered, voice carrying authority and promise. "We move on my signal." Ayana nodded, her pulse quickening, eyes wide with fear and determination. They had come this far, yet the journey had only just begun. The hidden valley, the distant fires, the men hunting them, all pieces of a puzzle whose picture had yet to be revealed. Taeyeon felt the thrill of impending conflict, the tension of unseen eyes and unspoken threats, and a rush of protectiveness, unlike anything he had felt before. As they crouched, waiting for the perfect moment to move, the night seemed to hum with possibility and danger alike. The twins' fate, the survival of the girl who had dared reveal the truth, and the future of a warrior and a wanderer bound by circumstance all hung in the balance. The prairie, endless and merciless, stretched around them, filled with secrets and shadows. Somewhere out there the answers lay hidden, waiting for those brave enough to reach for them. In the stillness before action, Taeyeon felt a surge of resolve and something else, something tender and unspoken, stirring between them. Ayana met his gaze, and in that moment, a wordless understanding passed between them. Wow. They were not just allies in a dangerous pursuit. They were something more, something uncharted, fragile, yet unbreakable. The night was thick with suspense, the air electric with possibility, and the journey that lay ahead promised peril, revelation, and the potential for love as fierce and enduring as the land itself. The first glimmer of dawn had yet to touch the valley, and the twin shadows of threat and hope loomed large. Tyann and Ayanna waited, poised on the edge of action, hearts beating with anticipation and fear. The prairie whispered its secrets, carrying the promise of danger and discovery alike, and the story of survival, courage, and love was only beginning. The first rays of sunlight barely kissed the horizon when Tyann and Ayanna crept through the narrow canyon, the world around them still steeped in shadows. Every rock and scrub bush could conceal a threat. Every whisper of wind carried the possibility of discovery. Tyann moved like a shadow himself, steps deliberate eyes scanning the rugged terrain for any sign of the men who had stolen the twins. Beside him, Ayanna mirrored his careful movements, her body tense, heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. She had never felt such a combination of danger and safety before. Tyann's presence was both a shield and a spark that ignited a warmth she could not name. They paused at a small outcropping overlooking a bend in the canyon, where the soft rumble of hooves echoed faintly in the distance. Tyann's dark eyes narrowed. "They're moving," he said quietly, voice a low growl. "Two men heading east.
Else?
They could be scouts or guards. Either way, we need to be ready." Ayanna's hand brushed against his as she leaned close, instinctively seeking guidance and reassurance. The brief touch sent a shiver through both of them, unspoken emotions tangled with the urgent need for survival. "I've followed their trail before," Ayanna whispered. "Through the hills beyond the river, there's a hidden ravine, a place where they keep what they steal. If the twins are alive, that's where they'll be." Her voice was steady, despite the tremor in her chest. Tyann studied her, noting the courage and intelligence in her expression. She had survived alone for years, navigating a world that was cruel and unforgiving, yet here she was offering knowledge and trust to a man she had only recently met. The canyon seemed endless, twisting and folding into shadows. As they descended toward the ravine, memories of Tyann's past bled into the present. He remembered nights when he had hidden in similar valleys, fleeing from men with no mercy, holding the memory of his own lost love close to keep despair at bay. Ayanna's presence reminded him of that love, of what had been stolen, and of the possibility of reclaiming something precious from a world that had tried to take everything. Suddenly, the distant cry of a bird-or? Was it a warning signal? Cut through the morning stillness. Tyann froze, listening. Ayanna crouched beside him, her chest rising and falling with anxious breaths. He motioned for her to stay silent, and together they watched as a small group of mounted men appeared on the ridge, rifles slung and faces hardened by greed and cruelty. These were no ordinary hunters or settlers. Tyann recognized their manner, their arrogance. They had hunted families before, leaving terror and ruin behind. "They're moving faster than expected," Tyann murmured. "We need another way. We cannot let them reach the ravine before us." Ayanna nodded, scanning the terrain. Her eyes fell on a narrow ledge above the path of the riders. "If we climb there, we can get ahead without being seen," she said, pointing to the precarious trail. Tyann agreed, and with careful coordination, they began the ascent, hearts pounding as rocks shifted beneath their weight. Amazed, the canyon seemed alive with threat, each shadow a potential enemy, each rustle a signal of danger. While they climbed, Tyann reflected on the growing connection between them. It was not just necessity that bound them together. It was a quiet, stubborn sense of understanding, a feeling that in each other they had found a fragment of something long lost. Ayanna's courage and determination stirred something in him he had thought buried forever, while his protective instincts and quiet strength offered her a sense of security she had not known since her childhood. Yet even in this fragile closeness, the looming threat kept tension taut, like a bowstring ready to snap. Reaching the ledge, they paused to catch their breath. From this vantage, the ravine lay ahead, shrouded in mist. With the distant figures of men moving like shadows near a small cabin, Tyann's grip on his bow tightened. "There," he whispered. "That's where they hide the children." Ayanna's eyes widened, both with hope and fear. She had imagined this moment countless times, the reunion she longed for, but reality carried a weight far greater than fantasy. The twins' lives hung in a delicate balance, and every step they took now could decide their fate. Suddenly, another sound reached them, the crack of a branch, a footstep on dry leaves. Taeyeon froze, instinct screaming. Ayana's hand shot out to steady him, and for a brief moment their eyes met. In that glance, words were unnecessary. They both understood the peril and the urgency. And yet there was something tender in that silent connection. A reminder that even in the darkest times, human bonds could offer strength. The first subplot of their journey began to reveal itself. Among the men in the ravine was a figure who seemed separate from the others. It's a man with a scar across his cheek and eyes that flicked with suspicion. Taeyeon recognized him as a notorious outlaw who had once crossed paths with the Apache warriors in distant territories. This man was clever, ruthless, and unpredictable. If he was involved, the twins' safety would require more than courage. It would demand strategy, patience, and perhaps even deception. Ayana, sensing Taeyeon's focus, whispered, "That one. He's dangerous. I've seen him before. He has a way of making people disappear without leaving a trace. If we're discovered, he won't hesitate to." Her voice trailed off, the threat unspoken but understood. Taeyeon's jaw tightened. He'd faced men like this before, but now the stakes were different. These weren't strangers. These were children he had loved from birth, innocence stolen and hidden by violence. The thought of them in harm's way ignited a fire in him stronger than fear. They moved closer, staying low, their shadows melting into the folds of the terrain. Every step was a careful calculation, every breath measured. Ayana's knowledge of the land and Taeyeon's instincts for danger made them a formidable team, yet the tension was nearly unbearable. They knew discovery could mean death, but they also knew hesitation could doom the twins. As they neared the ravine, Ayana's mind wandered briefly to the life she had imagined before tragedy had struck. She had dreamed of a home, laughter filling quiet rooms, and the safety of family restored. Now, with Taeyeon beside her, those dreams seemed both fragile and possible. She dared not voice her thoughts, for fear that distraction could ruin everything. Yet in the corners of her heart, a tentative hope bloomed. Taeyeon too felt the stirring of emotions he had long suppressed. The image of Ayana, brave and steadfast beside him, kindled a sense of longing and connection he had thought lost forever. Their romance, unspoken but undeniable, added weight to every decision, every risk. Love and danger intertwined, each amplifying the other, creating a tension that was as exhilarating as it was terrifying. Just as they reached the edge of the ravine, the sound of a child's cry echoed faintly. Taeyeon froze, heart clenching. Yana's eyes filled with tears, hope and fear mingling. The twins were near, perhaps only yards away, yet the distance felt unbearable. The men guarding the cabin shifted, laughter and voices carrying across the open space. Haen's hand found Ayana's, a firm, grounding grip. "We move now," he whispered, voice full of resolve. "Stay close and trust me." Ayana nodded, feeling the surge of courage that only came from shared purpose and shared danger. The final steps toward the twins' salvation and their own transformation were about to begin. And in that moment, the ravine held its breath. The twins were waiting, the men were watching, and Taeyeon and Ayana stood on the edge of action, hearts pounding, every instinct screaming that what happened next would change everything. The story was far from over, and the tension in the air promised peril, revelation, and the kind of human courage and love that could withstand even the harshest of lands. The morning mist clung to the ravine like a shroud, curling around rocks and sparse trees, hiding both threat and opportunity. Taeyeon and Ayana crouched just out of sight, the twins' faint cries carried on the wind, sharp and piercing. Every heartbeat was a drum of urgency, each breath measured, each glance a silent calculation. The cabin below, weathered and rough, looked peaceful enough from a distance, but Taeyeon knew better. The men inside were seasoned, dangerous, and armed. One wrong move, one careless step, and the fragile hope they clung to would shatter. Ayana's hand brushed against his as she leaned close, eyes wide with equal parts fear and determination. "They're so close," she whispered, voice trembling. "If we don't act soon," words faltered, unspoken threats hanging in the air. Taeyeon tightened his jaw, dark eyes sweeping over the terrain. Every instinct screamed that the twins' survival depended on speed, precision, and patience. He had faced danger before, but never like this, with innocent lives dangling on the edge, and someone else's fear entwined with his own. The scarred outlaw from before stepped onto the porch of the cabin, a rifle in hand, scanning the horizon. His presence radiated menace. Taeyeon recognized the tension in the men's movements. Even seasoned predators moved cautiously under his gaze, unaware of the silent warrior watching from above. "Stay low," Taeyeon murmured, fingers brushing hers again, grounding her in the moment. The connection between them was unspoken but undeniable. A spark of warmth amid fear, a tether against the creeping dread. Ayana nodded, heart racing. She had trusted few in her life, yet every fiber of her being knew that with Taeyeon, she was safer than she had ever been. Together, they were more than the sum of their fears. They were strength and strategy combined, two lives intertwined by circumstance and a growing, fragile trust. Even in the face of looming danger, the tension between them pulsed with quiet intimacy, a reminder that human connection could survive even in the harshest wilderness. Taeyeon studied the cabin, noting the positions of the men. The crates stacked against the walls, and the flickering shadows of movement within. One of the twins' small voices called out again, soft but urgent, and Taeyeon's chest tightened. The children were near, but so was the danger, and the razor's edge between hope and disaster seemed impossibly thin. He shifted, moving silently to a higher vantage point, where he could see the cabin's entire perimeter. Ayana followed, every step careful, every breath silent. "They have no idea we're here," he whispered. "One mistake and they'll know. One wrong sound, one shadow too obvious." His voice trailed off, the threat unspoken but clear. Ayana's hand found his again, holding on as if the touch alone could anchor them against the storm of fear pressing in. Her presence, gentle yet unwavering, lent him focus. Together, they were ready to move, but Taeyeon knew that timing would decide everything. Ayana's mind flickered back to her past, the nights she had spent hiding, running, and praying that the ones she loved would be safe. She had survived on wit and courage, yet nothing had prepared her for this moment. Standing beside a man she trusted completely, poised to reclaim what had been stolen from her. Her heart ached for the twins, for the life they had been denied, for the chance to finally rewrite a story of loss into one of hope. Below, the scarred outlaw barked an order, and two of his men moved toward the woods where Taeyeon and Ayana had approached. Instantly, Taeyeon's mind raced, calculating angles, distances, and potential paths. They could not afford direct confrontation yet. It would draw attention and endanger the children. He leaned closer to Ayana, whispering instructions. "We'll split their focus. You create a diversion near the rocks on the left. I'll move closer to the cabin. When the right moment comes, we strike together. Do you understand?" Ayana swallowed hard but nodded. Fear threatened to overtake her. Yet she felt a surge of courage, powered not just by necessity, but by the growing bond between them. Taeyeon's gaze met hers, dark and steady, conveying a trust she had never known before. It was a silent promise. Whatever happened next, they faced it together. And in that promise she found a strange, aching comfort. The diversion began. Ayana tossed a small stone down the slope, careful to create the sound of movement. One of the men paused, shifting attention toward the noise. Taeyeon seized the moment, moving silently along a narrow ledge, muscles coiled and every sense alert. The air was thick with tension, the mist hiding but not softening the danger that surrounded them. Every step brought him closer to the twins, and closer to the confrontation that would test every ounce of courage he and Ayana possessed. The twins' voices called again, closer now, tinged with fear and confusion. Taeyeon's heart pounded in response. He could almost feel their small, fragile forms in the distance. The innocence of their laughter and cries mixing with the threat of violence. His resolve hardened. No danger, no fear would keep him from reclaiming them. Yet even his determination surged. So did the pulse of anticipation, the knowledge that the outcome was uncertain, and that the moments ahead could tip into disaster at any instant. Ayana moved along the rocks, keeping the outlaw's attention divided. Her pulse raced, not just from the danger but from the nearness of Taeyeon, his presence a steady heartbeat against her own. In her mind, she imagined the twins' reunion, the warmth of family restored, and the possibility of a life free from the shadows of fear. She dared not voice the thought, for fear that distraction could cost them everything. Yet the hope persisted, fragile and persistent. Taeyeon, now near the cabin, crouched low behind a stack of crates. He could see the children, through a small window, huddled together, eyes wide with both fear and curiosity. His chest tightened, sight of them live, trembling, but unharmed ignited a fire that pushed aside every doubt, every hesitation. Yet even as he prepared to act, a new danger emerged. From the far side of the cabin, a rider appeared, galloping toward them, silhouette dark against the rising sun. "They're bringing reinforcements," Taeyeon whispered, his body tensing like a drawn bow. "We don't have much time." Ayana's fingers found his again, clutching tightly. Their hands were a lifeline, grounding them in the chaos, connecting them in ways words could never convey. They were partners, allies, and something more, something that pulsed quietly beneath fear. Beneath danger, a bond forged in shared purpose and shared peril. The twins' small cries rose in pitch, sensing the approaching threat, and Taeyeon's mind raced for the next move. The outlaw below was distracted, yet the new rider complicated everything. Timing, precision, and courage would determine the outcome. Every instinct told him that action was imminent, yet even as he crouched, the tension stretched taut, a wire ready to snap. Ayana's eyes met his, and in that brief moment, they shared a silent acknowledgement of what was to come. They would face the danger together, heart and soul, and whatever happened next would test them in ways neither could yet imagine. The mist thickened, swallowing shapes and sound, yet the tension only grew sharper. Every shadow, every movement, every breath was a potential threat. The twins' safety, their lives, and the fragile promise of love and connection between Taeyeon and Ayana hung in balance. In that suspended moment, the world seemed to pause, holding its breath, waiting for the storm of action that would erupt at any instant. And as the sun climbed higher, glinting off rifles and catching the edges of shadows, the final moments before confrontation approached, hearts pounded, muscles coiled, and the silent electric anticipation stretched taut. The story teetered on the edge of chaos and salvation, with danger, courage, and love intertwined like threads in a tapestry. The climax loomed, unresolved, promising peril, passion, and the chance for hope to triumph, but only if every move was perfect, and every heart remained steadfast. The moment broke like lightning. Taeyeon leaped from his hiding spot, bow drawn, moving with the quiet precision of a predator, yet guided by the protection of a father's love. Arrows flew, cutting through the early morning mist, striking near enough to warn without taking life unnecessarily. The scarred outlaw shouted, fumbling for his rifle, but Taeyeon was already in motion, sliding behind crates and using the shadows to his advantage. Ayana followed, swift and sure, leading the twins toward a small gap in the cabin's foundation where they had seen light spilling from beneath a loose board. The children, frightened but trusting the woman who had risked so much for them, clutched each other as they moved. Taeyeon's heart pounded as he saw the new rider approach. It was a young man, less seasoned than the outlaw, but dangerous in his confidence. With a precise toss, Taeyeon disarmed him, sending the rifle clattering against the rocks below. The rider froze, eyes wide in disbelief, and Taeyeon used the distraction to guide the twins to safety. "Run," he commanded softly, voice full of authority and warmth. "Keep moving, toward the trees. You're safe now." Ayana's eyes shone as she watched the children dash into the cover of the woods. Relief washed over her in waves, but she did not allow herself to relax just yet. Taeyeon was still in the fray, still facing the men who had torn her life apart. Her hand found his, fingers clutching tightly as she moved beside him, ready to help him finish the fight if necessary. Their connection, forged in fear and courage, now carried the weight of triumph, a bond strengthened by survival and love. The scarred outlaw, realizing his control had slipped, charged at Taeyeon with a reckless fury. But Taeyeon was ready, body coiled with skill and instinct. He dodged, caught the man's wrist, and twisted, forcing him to the ground. The outlaw's struggle ended quickly. Taeyeon's strength and precision left no room for escape. Ayana approached, holding the outlaw's gaze with fierce intensity, making sure he understood that further harm would not be tolerated. For a moment, the air was thick with tension, but the danger had been neutralized. As the sun climbed higher, casting gold over the ravine, Tehan finally allowed himself to breathe. He crouched near the twins, who were now huddled together, eyes wide but safe. "You're safe," he said, voice steady yet filled with emotion. The twins blinked, trying to process the sudden presence of the man they barely knew, but who had risked everything for them. Ayana knelt beside them, brushing hair from their faces, and whispered gentle reassurances. For the first time in months, the children smiled, the tension in their small bodies melting into cautious relief. Tehan turned to Ayana, eyes meeting hers, and in that glance was the unspoken acknowledgement of everything they had endured together. Fear, danger, and heartbreak had forged something deeper than trust. It was a bond rooted in shared survival, mutual respect, and the quiet awakening of love. Ayana reached up, brushing a loose strand of hair from his forehead. "We did it," she said softly, voice trembling with the weight of the morning. "They're safe because of you." "No," Tehan replied, shaking his head with a small smile. "Because of us. We did this together." His hand found hers, fingers intertwining as they stood, surrounded by the stillness of the ravine that had once held so much fear. The prairie around them was quiet now, save for the soft rustling of leaves and the distant call of birds returning to the sky. Life, fragile yet resilient, had begun to reclaim its place. As they led the twins through the woods, the morning sun illuminated the path ahead. Turning the landscape into gold and green, the children laughed softly, the sound of balm to wounds that had not yet fully healed. Ayana watched them, heart full, realizing that the story of loss she had carried for so long had been rewritten. Tehan moved beside her, his presence steady, reassuring, a promise that the dangers of the past would not define the future. In the quiet moments that followed, they came to a small clearing near a gentle stream. The twins played along the water's edge, tossing stones and squealing with delight, while Ayana and Tehan watched, the weight of their journey slowly lifting. "They're happy," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "Or, for the first time in so long, they can just be children." Tehan's gaze softened, the hard edges of his past life melting in the warmth of the present. "I promised I would protect them," Tehan said, voice low, but firm, "and I will. No one will harm them again." His words were both a declaration and a comfort, not just to the twins, but to Ayana as well. In that promise, she found the courage to hope, to imagine a life beyond fear, beyond running and hiding, a life rooted in trust, safety, and love. As the day unfolded, they prepared a small camp near the stream, sharing what little food they had brought and tending to minor scrapes and bruises. Ayana watched Tehan carefully, noting the quiet patience and strength with which he moved. There was a tenderness in his actions that belied the hardened warrior he had become. Hint of the man he had been before loss had hardened his heart. And in her heart, a warmth grew, a quiet certainty that their journey together was far from over. Even as the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, the prairie felt alive with possibility. The twins slept safely under a blanket of stars, their breaths even and peaceful. Tehan and Ayana sat together, side by side, hands entwined, sharing silence that spoke volumes. The danger had passed, yet the emotional weight of their experiences lingered, a reminder of the journey that had brought them here and the lives they had reclaimed. "I never thought we'd get here," Ayana whispered, leaning slightly against him. "I never thought hope could feel this." Real Tehan's hand brushed against hers, a gentle squeeze that carried reassurance, pride, and affection. "Hope," he said softly, "was always here. We just had to find it again." The night stretched over them, calm and quiet, the kind of night where reflection feels natural and safe. Tehan and Ayana spoke of small dreams of rebuilding, of laughter filling quiet rooms, of a family whole again. Every word, every touch cemented the bond between them, a romance nurtured in danger and solidified in triumph. For the first time, they allowed themselves to imagine a life beyond survival, a life where love, courage, and family could coexist. And as the first light of dawn painted the prairie in soft gold, Tehan, Ayana, and the twins rose to face the world together. They had endured fear, danger, and loss, yet now they moved forward, united and strong. The scars of the past remained, but they no longer defined them. What mattered now was the strength of the bonds they had forged, the love that had grown quietly through trials. the courage to face each new day together. In that moment, the prairie no longer seemed harsh and unforgiving. It seemed alive with possibility, a landscape where love, courage, and family could thrive. Taeyeon and Ayana stood together, hands clasped, hearts aligned, watching the twins play freely in the golden light. The story of loss and fear had reached its resolution, replaced by one of triumph, connection, and hope. They had reclaimed what had been taken, discovered the strength within themselves, and found love amidst chaos. The past, once heavy and relentless, had given way to the promise of a future they would build together. And in the quiet hush of the prairie, with the wind whispering through grass and trees, Taeyeon and Ayana knew that no matter what lay ahead, they had each other, and that was enough.